Well, I was born in Chicago, Illinois. When I was 18 years old, I got drafted. The draft board wanted to put me in the Army, and I said, no, I don't want to go in the Army. And I went to the Navy in 1943, got out in 1946. I was motor machinist, third class. I served in D-Day and Invasion, the Battle of the Bulge, and through EPE Day. We went to England, got to England, and we went to Southampton, and that's where we were scheduled for. And then we had to go for training, for a run. We were planning on going for D-Day. And then we had about 8 ships, 8 LST ships. And we were supposed to sail up to Flattened Sands right there. It was a completely beach there, about 30,000 acres. The interesting thing about this the people that live there, been living there for centuries. They had monarchy and churches that have been there for centuries. And the war admirals decided they need to be vacated. The war admiral said that all these people had to leave. Can you imagine when you had to give up sugar, gasoline, and all those things during the war? They had to give up everything. They had to give up their homes. They were wheat farms and they were dairy farms. And they've been there for centuries. They had to raid the army and everything, all the material was coming there because it was ideal for training. So those people had to leave and they had no place to go. Whatever happened to them, I don't know. But they were such wonderful people there. There were 8 LSTs. I was on ship 515. She was the flagship. I had a lieutenant commander, Skerhal, was on. So we were supposed to sail up with the 8 ships, and we were supposed to land there. This was a practice for D-Day. About 12 o'clock at midnight, we were called to general quarters. So I was in my sack and I got up, got dressed and ran to I was stationed in one of the gun turrets on the starboard side up in the front. We were no longer there than 15, 20 minutes, they secured. Then we went back to my bunk. About another 15 minutes, general quarters ran. And we all ran to each of our shores. So as we were looking out, then all of a sudden we looked out, and the last ship, 507, was torpedoed. 10 minutes later, 289 was torpedoed. A few minutes later, 531 was torpedoed. 531 took 2 torpedoes. 289, she took 1 in the tailback. She hit the rudder, but she didn't hit the screw. She was able to run, but she could not steer. Our ship with the commander was in his sleeping quarters, and they finally woke him up and told him what was happening. So the order of the day was, whenever we were attacked, LSTs were supposed to just go to the land. They were supposed to land. Captain Doyle, my skipper, said to the commander, we were going to pick up survivors. And sure, the lieutenant commander was not very happy with the decision. So then he says to one of our one lieutenant, he said, what do you think about this decision? He says, I want to go with Captain Doyle. So the commander says to him, he says, well, you know what, you'll never make a naval officer. Anyway, we sat there. Then we started to turn and go to start pick up survivors. And then we heard from the tower that a P-2 boat was coming after us. And the report was to say, hold your fire, do not shoot. They were telling us how close the PT boat was at us. It was a German E-boat, that's what they call them. It was getting closer, within a mile and a half. When it got within a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, a couple of blocks, we roared a fire. And we opened up fire, and the torpedo went by our bow, which missed us. So after that, we started, the captain says, well, we're going to start going back and pick up survivors, and the commander was really upset with that. So anyway, we started to go, and you could hear them screaming. The ships were burning. We had full equipment, tanks and everything, trucks on top, and they were blowing up, and the guys were coming up. One of the fellas down in the engine room, when they got torpedoed, it just threw him up against the wall, and they almost knocked him out. But he got up and he walked up and wondered what was up. The auxiliary room was right next to the engine room. And the captain asked how those in the auxiliary room. He says, they're gone. There's no chance for them. The ship on 289, which got hit in the tail, there were people there. They were killed. The water was 45 degrees of temperature. You couldn't see. So we started to come down and look. Then we lowered our LCVP boats, and we had a young coxswain. He was only 16 years old, served in the mission in Africa. He got on one of the CV boats, and the other guy got another boat, and we went out. I can remember them going by the ship when I was on the gun turret. They were screaming, help me, help me, help me, and we yelled out, we'll be there. We're going to pick you up. The boat's going to pick you up. So he picked up so many, and then the other one picked up so many. So it got so heavy, so we had to open the bow doors, and we lowered the ramp. And then the small boats came by, and we unloaded them. Most of them were dead. We put them on the tank deck. Then I remember Floyd Hicks. He heard a guy screaming, and he threw a ladder over, and he went down to help the guy. The guy he picked up was dead, so he let him go, and then he helped another guy to come up the ladder because they were so cold and they were so freezing, and most of them were damaged. What happened with the Army and all that, they had these belts here, and when the explosion happened, they fell in the water, and their heads were down in the water. They drowned. If they'd have had a Mae West, even though they would have been knocked out, they wouldn't have been. But most of them didn't. We picked up at least 100. And I remember we had one of our fellas on the table, and we were trying to revive him, and he died. And we pulled out his wallet. And there was a picture of his wife and his child. And we had to take his dog tags. And we took all the dog tags and put them in a bag. By that time, it was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Finally, the British were coming out. And they were dead all over the place. And here these English boats were coming by. Instead of picking up the dead bodies, they were just going right through them. They went just right through them. There were arms and legs, and hands were dead. So we finally got into port, and Dr. Green was the officer there, a medical officer, and he was taking care of the wounded. And the story was that you couldn't talk about it at all. You couldn't talk at all about it. But years later, Dr. Green got a hold of an English writer, and they wrote this book, Exercise Taker. It's the whole story of what happened in it. Actually, they had it in 1980-something. It was put on ABC 2020. It was, you might have seen it sometime. But it tells you the story about each one of these guys and what they went through. One of the fellas, he was so cold, but he was helping his buddy on the raft. And he was so concerned that his legs were frozen he wouldn't be able to walk again. But he hung on to his buddy. Even the Army guys were hanging on to rafts. And then they'd be holding on to another. And the next thing you know, they let go because they just drowned and they were too frozen to die. Captain Doyle was a regular Navy man, and I was in the engine room with a fellow called Mark, and he was a good guy, and he was the one who went down the side to pick up one of the, but they were dead. After that, we made D-Day. We landed on D-Day at day one at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. No sooner hit D-Day and we got strafed by a German plane came after us, and before we knew it, an American P-47 was right on them and got them. LST-515 made 52 trips across the English Channel, and we didn't leave England till 1946, and I got nursed out in there. But when we landed in D-Day, we had all these blimps right there. Yeah. And, we must have picked up at least 100. I don't know how many we had dead on the tank deck. But that's about the story of it. But anyway, I just want to say that the shipmates that we were great buddies. We looked out for each other. We loved each other. And I'm grateful for this opportunity to share this with you. Thank you.